Let's jump right into statistics. Since that's everyone's favorite topic, we'll get going with that and then move on to less interesting things like how to actually ride properly. Here we have a rundown of what vehicles are insured in BC. The important thing to us is motorcycles and unfortunately also mopeds. So let's go to 2016, 120,000 motorcycles and mopeds insured in BC. Another important thing here is that this includes limited speed motorcycles, scooters, and trikes. Now, the only vehicles that require a Class 6 license, a motorcycle license, are motorcycles and trikes. These other ones you can drive or operate with just your standard Class 5 license. So the fact that they are included in our statistics for motorcycles kind of poisons the well right off the bat. It gives us bad statistics, and we don't know what percentage of this number or any of the other numbers is actually motorcycles and what percentage is limited speed motorcycles and scooters or mopeds. We have no way of knowing that information. So, from that, we move on to this. Here is the bad news. The number of accidents. So we've got, over our 5-year average, 2,400 incidences, 1,500 injured victims, and an average of 32 fatalities each year. The good news there, if we can take any out of that, is that my math tells me, based on the number of insured vehicles and the number of incidents, that is only 20% of the vehicles that are insured are being involved in an incident, or possibly there could be someone who's crashing their bike and then crashing it again later on. But anyway, that's not a horribly high number realistically. I said 20%, I meant 2%. 2%. 20 is too high. I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing. Fantastic. Great start. Okay, anyway. This number, when I first started doing lessons, that number was usually around 50. So it's been coming down. In the last decade, the number has dropped. The fatalities have gone down. But this, we can see the injuries. That is pretty consistent every year. So is the number of overall crashes. I mean, there's a bit of a spike here. It's a slight incline, but as far as actual numbers go, that's not a massive variation. The injuries is obviously a bad one, and fatalities are always bad, but those numbers aren't as high as you would expect if you listen to what the government, ICBC, and the media like to tell us about motorcycles. And when they do report on motorcycle accidents, it almost always involves a bunch of people talking about how crazy and dangerous motorcyclists are and how we're all trying to kill ourselves. Here we have the age of riders involved in the crashes. The big thing to notice is that 15% is people from 46 to 50. This chart actually doesn't show as huge a spike around this age demographic as there used to be. These three age groups used to tower way above everything else, with the exception of the 21 to 25 group. The reason that this number was higher, and it appears to be going down is simply because a lot of people who used to ride when they were young sell their bikes, have families, put everything else on hold for a while, and then once the kids are in university or move out of the house, they've got time on their hands, they can actually get back into doing the things they enjoy, and maybe they have some spare cash. They go out and buy themselves a bike, even though they haven't ridden in maybe 20 years. A lot of people don't like to admit that they don't know what they're doing after taking a break from something. That's where this whole thing comes in. That's why we see a spike here, combined with the fact that these are probably people who just have bikes more than, say, a 16 to 20-year-old. I was riding then, but not a lot of people do. There's definitely a lot more people in the 40 to 60 range that are riding motorcycles than there are people in the early 20s. But there is also a lot of riders who are getting back into riding, just buying a bike and jumping on and going. Here's the contributing factors to the crash. As you can see, unsafe speed is 21% over here, followed by riding without due care at 17 and rider inexperience at 17. How they determined that the inexperience is the reason for a crash, I do not know, but this is what they are saying, so that's what the numbers are reflecting. And then there's impaired rider as well at 6%. Riding when you're drinking is not a good idea. I have had an incident where I stopped off at a pub on my way home after work one day. I was on my R1, I had one beer, I hung out with friends for well over an hour, I ate food, like I had a whole meal, and then on my way home I realized that my throttle control was absolutely sloppy, and I almost binned it, just because the R1 is not a forgiving motorcycle. And any lack of control with your throttle on that bike can be disastrous. That tiny little bit of effect that one beer had on me, and I did not feel it at all, but I definitely noticed it in my throttle control. I don't touch booze at all if I'm riding now. Even if I'm legally sober, I am not getting on a bike after having a beer. Another thing to note here, when it comes to the unsafe speed, we have to take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. Anytime that a driver pulls out in front of a motorcyclist and says, "I didn't see them," they will most often call that the rider riding at an unsafe speed. I remember a few years ago I read in the paper about an incident where a driver who was drunk pulled out in front of a motorcycle and killed the rider and was allowed to go on with his day because he said that the rider was going so fast he couldn't see him. Which, for that to be true, would mean that the rider would have had to have been traveling faster than the speed of light, since the bike had a headlight. A drunk driver was let off scot-free because he said a motorcyclist was going fast. So they called that unsafe speed on the part of the motorcyclist. So some of these statistics are obviously questionable. And you'll notice that if you add all that up, it doesn't make 100% either. I'm not entirely sure what the other causes are. I don't have that information. The location of the crash. Big one, may be a surprise to you, but it's between intersections. 47% of crashes between intersections. Most people would expect the crashes to all happen at intersections, but that number is only 34%. Now, when we say between intersections, obviously we mean where there isn't roads meeting. That doesn't count roads intersecting with alleyways or driveways, so someone pulling out of a back alley or someone pulling out of their driveway, or a bike coming out of the driveway and into traffic and just not seeing something or whatever the cause. 8% for intersections with alleys or driveways. 11% are unknown, but we need to talk about this number, the 47%. So when you're riding down the road, twisty, curvy road, that's where a lot of accidents happen. A lot of single vehicle accidents happen in the twisty bits. The fun stuff is where people crash. That can be people just riding too fast, outriding their skill set, and it could be other vehicles getting in your way. That does happen. Could be road conditions. You could be in the middle of a curve and hit some gravel. It could be that you're just riding down the road and a deer jumps out in front of you. Almost half of motorcycle crashes happen between intersections, not at them. So the pre-crash action of the motorcycle, traveling in the straight line, 68%. That of course does include going through the twisties, hitting the curves. Now it should be noted that it's almost never one curve that makes people crash. It's the second or third curve in a series. When people don't set themselves up for the last turn before they enter the first turn, they end up on a bad line and can't make the next turn. That's where the problem starts. You need to be planning where you need to go before you even enter the first turn or curve. Motorcycle making a left turn, that's 7%, and slowing down or stopping is 5%. Obviously, we need to be looking in our mirrors when we're slowing down and stopping, especially in heavy traffic. We're not allowed to lane split, so we get stuck behind vehicles. We have to position ourselves in a smart spot and pay attention to the people behind us to make sure we're not going to get hit. And we also need to leave enough safe following distance that if we're slowing down or stopping because the person in front of us is, that we are going to get slowed down or stopped fast enough to not rear end them. The primary cause of the crash, we'll start up here because it's messy, making a left turn and being struck by an oncoming vehicle is 3%. Passing same direction traffic, so you're stuck behind someone going out and passing them, somehow you end up in a crash, but whether it's oncoming traffic, pulling back in and then being hit, or any number of scenarios involved there, I'm not entirely sure, but 5% of motorcycle crashes are passing. Leaving the road on the left side of the road, so that means you at some point crossed the center line and shot off the left side of the road. That it's probably safe to assume that that's failure to navigate a curve. There's not really a lot of scenarios where you're going to end up just riding along and then crossing the center line, crossing the left lane, and going off the road. Rear-ended, 10%. Obvious, check your mirrors. Always check your mirrors. If you're stopped in traffic, check your mirrors. Keep your bike in gear and ready to go. Have an escape route planned, and check your mirrors. Being struck by a left-turning vehicle is 11%. So that's not as high a number as most people would expect. We tend to think that the left-turning car is the biggest danger to us on the road. But when you combine leaving the left side of the road with leaving the right side of the road, that's a way bigger number than being struck by a left-turning vehicle. And then we've got 11% for being struck on the right side in an intersection. So going through an intersection and basically being T-boned. These two numbers combined are definitely way less than these two numbers combined. So 31% versus 22%. 31% is almost entirely going to be failure to navigate a curve. So that is pretty much it for me talking about numbers. I'm going to get into all sorts of other things like physics and such at some point here, but as far as just straight up statistics, this is important to know. This right here is the main thing to know. This stuff sucks for sure. Left turn vehicles do cause a lot of deaths in motorcyclists, but so does going off the road, not making a turn and slamming into a tree or a rock face or falling off a cliff. Those are really bad things too, and that happens more often than getting hit by someone who's turning left. So while we're definitely going to have to be careful about people and watching out for cars that are turning left, we also need to be really careful about picking our lines through the turns, picking the right speed for the turns, navigating carefully to make sure we're not causing our own crashes. That's it for this one.